a new segment that I want us to get into here as we move into the winter period of the college football calendar. And this is something they do across the board in the college football world, mostly with players. At the end of every single season, whether it's after the bowl game, whether it's before the bowl game, you have what's called an exit meeting. An exit meeting essentially is you sitting down with your position coach or the head coach, and you have just a transparent conversation about how they see you within the program. So I got to thinking, okay, hey, we're a program of our own here. We are fortunate and blessed enough to talk about this sport every single day. We talk a lot about these head coaches. Let's kind of have an exit meeting with these head coaches. We're not calling it exit meetings because that sounds like somebody's losing their job, which we're not going to, obviously traffic in this segment. I want to do these and call them hard count meetings. So the first hard count meeting, we're taking ourselves out to Athens, Georgia, and kind of getting a good lay of the land for where Kirby Smart is as it pertains to Georgia. Because the last couple of years, the standard has been very, very clear. They are the back-to-back national champions going into this season. And so the expectation was Georgia is not being hunted by anybody, per Kirby Smart. We're still in chase mode. We are still in hunt mode. And I think that was true. And the fact they didn't win the national title this year, I think, obviously, was missing the mark for Georgia. Didn't win the SEC, missing the mark for Georgia, missing the mark for Kirby Smart and company. And so as we move into this 12-team playoff model, I think there are some folks that are starting to buy the idea that, well, is Georgia going to stay Georgia if they have to play more games when they get to that 12-team model and more teams get a shot at them? Or is Georgia going to stay Georgia with the new SEC at OU and Texas in there? They got to play Bama next year, does Georgia? Here's the facts. Georgia, if they had been in Houston, which they weren't, just so we're clear, but if Georgia had been in Houston and played Michigan, I wholeheartedly believe they would have been favored. Georgia was not in that game in Houston because they lost one game by 3 points in Atlanta, Georgia, to a really well-coached Alabama team run by Nick Saban with one of the best players in college football this past season, Jalen Milroe, who was playing really well at that point in time. Also worth noting, a fact in that is Georgia was dinged up at some key spots. Guys that played, but just quite honestly weren't full health, and we could see that. Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, two guys that contribute to that team in an enormous way, especially offensively, and Georgia suffered because of their lack of being full strength, to be honest. Georgia, again, this is a fact, in Vegas right now is the favorite to win the national title in 2024. So when we take an all-encompassing look at this thing in Athens, Georgia is a unit of a program. Like the standards and the culture that Kirby Smart has in place there are second to none. Championship habits, championship practice periods. You hear about Bloody Tuesday and how they beat the absolute heck out of each other every single week, even during the season. They say that that is some ways more difficult than the game that they play. So what I'm trying to say here is the machine and the process in place at Georgia is built to give you championship results. And that's not me just sort of saying that because it sounds good on a YouTube video. I'm saying that because we've seen that given their track record 2 of the last 3 seasons. On top of that, you can have standards, you can have culture, you can have all of that, but to some degree, you still got to go and play the game. Well, Georgia, they have nothing but top 3 classes since 2020 on their roster right now. I go back to 2020 because going back further than that, we're probably, going to guys that aren't even playing college football anymore. But the bottom line here is they have a lot of depth. They have a lot of talent. And yes, the portal's a thing. Yes, guys are going to the portal to try and find somewhere else to play and to find, a better situation for them. Georgia's still going to have, I would say, as talented a 2-deep as anybody else in the country. Why? Because guys know if I do my time at Georgia on the practice squad or, with the 2s or whatever it ends up being, if I wait my turn, it just takes one good year. It just takes one good year to go and have my NFL draft stock where I want it to be. So guys are bought into the journey at Georgia, the development at Georgia. This is a big word you hear a lot with coaches and with great leaders alike. The process at Georgia, second to none. And so you have the talent, you have the process, you have the culture, you have the standards. And so when we look going forward now to what we were talking about with the 12-team model and how maybe that could impact Georgia and their chance at going for another back-to-back run or whatever we're going to say with their national championship aspirations. A lot of folks saying that the 12-team model is going to hurt Georgia. Y'all, I think the exact opposite. I think when you go to a 12-team playoff model, Georgia's only going to be in better position. Why? How many times have we seen Georgia have multiple bad days in a season to the point where it's cost them the game? This past year, it was one. Does anybody really want to see Georgia in a playoff model this past season? If Georgia were to find their way in there and we see on Selection Sunday that 4 spot flashes up with a G logo on there, I think a lot of teams would say, oh boy, they're in the building. And so now with Georgia, with this 12-team model, a couple of things happen. One, during the regular season, they have much more margin for error. So if they win the SEC or not, I have a difficult time believing we won't see Georgia in that 12-team field next year. I think that's inevitable. But when they get into that 12-team dance, when they're in the building and they have a chance to where, okay, sights are set on this thing, we win our games and we're the national champs, we're in the building now, and they can still lose a game prior to that whole thing, like they can drop a game to Bama in September and still find their way into the dance, like that's dangerous. That's very, very dangerous because Kirby Smart takes losses and uses them as ammunition. We've seen that now. Whenever they are coming off of a loss or they're a little bit down, they haven't played their best, they usually bounce back with some force. So one, the margin for error they have is crazy. Two, the 12-team model is really going to peel back the layers on some of the true depth that these teams have. And Georgia, again, they have more depth, I believe, or as much depth as anybody else in the country. That's what it's going to come down to when it comes to this 12-team model. If you're winning the title, you have the depth to do it. When it comes to how Georgia is built as well, I want to make sure we say this. They are as multiple of a team as they need to be to win the national title. And that's going to be more important here as we move into this new era of college football. We've seen teams kind of be able to play one style and have the best day on the right day and win the national championship. Georgia, if you were to throw them out there on the field with an Oregon from this past season and they got to win a shootout, they'd be fine. If you threw them out there with Michigan this past year and they got to go mano-a-mano in the trenches, they got to hold up there into the bargain in that physical kind of game, they'd be fine. The fact that they can shape-shift so well, and I think that'll be the case again next season with Carson Beck coming back, the way they attacked the portal with Trevor Etienne and Colby Young, like Georgia's multiple attacks is going to favor them when they get in this 12-team dance. That's going to pay off because I don't know that every single team in that 12-team model next year will be able to shape-shift as well as them. And that's going to be a factor, mark my words, when it comes to this time next year. So as much as it feels disappointing and probably a little bit frustrating to not have won the SEC and not won the national title for the 3rd year in a row because you set the standard way up here, Georgia's going to be fine. Because the way that Kirby Smart has built this thing from a roster standpoint and just quite frankly their traits of being one of the most disciplined, one of the most competitive, relentless operations out there, they're going to be fine because that's not changing because Kirby Smart is still the head coach there. So let me know how you feel about Georgia moving into this 12-team model. Again, I think they're just going to be a wagon, and I think the margin for error for them is just only going to help them in the long term. I don't think Georgia's going to have multiple bad Saturdays in a row. So good luck to everybody else. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.